Hi, this is Mrs. Vrobel. We're going to be talking about analyzing data with this series of videos. And as you'll notice, I have a few learning objectives for part one today. So when we're looking at analyzing data, we need to talk about SI units first because we need to know the language of science, which is metric. Also, we need to understand what are the types of prefixes that are typically used with a metric system. And then lastly, we're going to compare derived units with volume and density. Okay, the SI system. So the SI system is short for System International. I'm sorry, I'm not a French speaker, but they were the ones that originated the system. And it's good for you to know the following. Notice that when we're talking about length, its base unit is in meter, and there's the lowercase m. Mass, we're talking about kilogram. Now you'll notice in lab we're going to do a lot of grams, but the base unit of mass is kilograms. And then liters. Also, when we're in the lab, we typically use milliliters as opposed to liters. For temperature, a lot of scientists talk in Kelvin, but when we work in the lab, we're primarily going to be working with Celsius. And then lastly, amount of substance is the mole, and we're not talking about a furry rodent, we're talking about something else. Okay, now there's a bunch of prefixes here. Now the ones that I have highlighted, you've got mega, you've got kilo, you've got centi, and you've got milli. These are the four that I want you to remember. Notice that mega and kilo, we're talking about multiplying by thousands. Whereas centi and milli, we're looking at dividing by 100 or 1,000, okay? All right, so base measurements. Please note when we're talking about time, and occasionally we do talk about time, we're talking about seconds, and they actually have a standard that is in Paris, and we have a cesium atom that is radioactive, and it typically ejects a particle every second, and that's how they keep track of time. For length, length is actually meter, and they do use light to help measure length. And notice that it's the distance that it travels in one 299 millionth of a second. And then lastly, we have the kilogram. If you ever hit a compare kilogram to the English system, notice that it's 2.2 pounds. So you would take your weight and you would essentially double it, and that's the amount. I'm sorry, you would divide by 2, not double it. Okay, here we go. Temperature. Now, I'm going to assume that you've heard discussions about Kelvin before. This is just a reminder that Kelvin, it's a positive scale, and it goes from 0, which is complete lowest point of the temperature scale, all the way up. And if you want to convert between Celsius, which is a positive and negative scale, you want to add 273 to whatever Celsius temperature you want. But we will primarily deal with Celsius. Occasionally we'll deal with Kelvin. Okay, we have derived units. Now derived units actually use base units. So you might ask yourself, what is a base unit? A base unit is anything that can be measured on its own. You don't need to multiply it. You don't need to divide to get that unit, okay? Volume, you actually have to multiply length by 3 times, okay? So notice that volume is cubed meters. We typically deal in milliliters. You could talk about a decimeter. So notice that volume is a derived unit. Here I have a picture of how you could arrange to measure volume. And if you wanted to, you could take the measurement of 1 cube and then you would multiply it by the number of cubes. Notice that you can also make it smaller and smaller. Like I said, we typically deal in centimeters or milliliters, okay? Notice that there are 1,000 milliliters in 1 liter, okay? Occasionally we will talk about microliters, but very rarely, okay? Okay, density is actually a derived unit, and the reason why it's derived is you have to take 2 units and divide them. So here we are typically looking at grams per milliliter, so we could actually measure the mass of a substance and then measure the volume and just divide the two, and that's how we get density. Okay, here's the summary. So please remember that we must speak in SI units because that's how scientists communicate with each other. We need to look at prefixes like centi, milli, mega. Also, if you want to use Celsius but convert it to Kelvin, you need to add 273 to the original temperature. And then lastly, volume and density are derived units, and density is essentially mass divided by volume.